Welcome to another episode of Hardware Lens. This is part 3 of our series of the ultimate high-value, high-performance gaming PC. In today's episode, we are going to be overclocking the RAM. In our last episode, we covered the CPU overclocking, and we got a 5 gigahertz stable overclock with a 4.7 gigahertz uncore overclock. That's been validated as stable. So we are going to begin overclocking the RAM. The first thing we're going to do, the RAM that we'll be overclocking is 16 gigs of the Patriot Viper Steel's 4400 megahertz kits with a C19 cast latency. These are my favorite RAM sticks out there. It's pretty much all I buy for my builds now. It's Samsung B-die, and it was $120 for 16 gigs of high bin Samsung B-die, so I really can't find a good reason to buy anything else. So to start, we're going to set our system agent voltage here and our VCCIO voltage to 1.3. That's around the upper limit of what's safe. We're not going to go higher than 1.35. That's what seems to be considered safe, or the upper limit of it anyway. For the DRAM voltage, I'm going to go ahead and use 1.45 for now. We'll see if we need any more. We can go up to 1.5 safely with no problem with B-die, but more voltage can also introduce thermal instability because of the heat generated. Although this PC does have a fan blowing directly over the RAM, so I don't think it's going to be a problem, but we'll stick with 1.45 for now. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get in here and set a baseline for our primary and secondary timings. So our primary timings are set at the default for this RAM at the 4400 megahertz speed, which it's rated for. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to set up our secondary timings. A lot of the techniques in this video are taken from a guide from github.com. We'll be posting a link in the description for that, so a lot of this is not my own knowledge, but coming from that guide. I'm certainly not the world's best memory overclocker. This will be a pretty basic guide, just for what most people are going to want to do with their RAM, because honestly, to stability test all these timings here, it's going to take days and days and days, and most people are not going to have the patience for that. Alright, so let's get started. Okay, so we're going to set what's considered a pretty safe numbers for our secondary timings. The first thing we're going to set here is the TRRDS, and we're going to set that to 6. Next, we're going to set TRRDL. We're going to set that to 6. And then we're going to set TFAW. We're going to set that to 24. And last, we're going to set TWR. And we'll set that to 16. We're setting these at our safe limit. Once we're done with everything else, we'll come back to these. The first thing I like to do is I like to go for the max frequency, and then I like to tighten the timings once we find our limit. A lot of times frequency is going to be limited by the CPU's memory controller. It can also be limited by the motherboard itself. The motherboard we're using in this video is the Gigabyte Z490 Aorus Ultra. It has been pretty good for memory overclocking, in my opinion. It's gotten us 4000 megahertz stable with 4 sticks of this RAM on another build, so we're going to see how it does with 2 sticks today. But that's pretty impressive for a daisy chain motherboard, so we're expecting good results. The board features shielded memory topology and an advanced daisy chain layout. So let's see what it will do here. Primary timings, we're going to leave them where they are here. And the last thing we're going to set is the TRFC. Okay, so TRFC is actually in nanoseconds. It's suggested for BDI that the nanoseconds for TRFC should be anywhere between 160 and 180, and we're going to use that suggestion. And to get the number that we enter in the BIOS, we need to multiply the nanoseconds times the memory frequency and divide that by 2000. So we're going to use a memory frequency of 5000 to be very conservative right now, because we don't know how high we're going to get our frequency. So we'll do 180 times 5000 divided by 2000, and that gives us 450. Okay, so we're not quite done here. We've got a couple tertiary timings that we're gonna need to tweak first. So the first one is TRDRDSG, and we're gonna put that on 8. The next one is TRDRDDG, and we're gonna leave that on 4. And the next one is DR. We're going to use 8. And the last one is DD, and we're going to use 8 for that as well. Alright, and now we're going to move on to TWRWR. TWRWR, starting with SG, 8. 4 for DG, and 8 for DR, and 8 for DD. Alright, and the last thing we're going to do is we're going to set the command rate to 2 right now. So 2T. We'll try 1T later on, but we're going to leave it on 2 for now until we find our max frequency. Alright, so now that we have all our timings set, I'm going to go ahead and save a profile. And I'm going to save that as RAM stock. This is our baseline. Okay. Oh, I forgot to set the speed. Alright, so it's 4400, so we're going to set 4400. Hopefully it'll boot. Now, just because your RAM is rated for 4400 doesn't mean you're actually going to be able to run it, because again, it depends on the CPU memory controller and the motherboard itself. Alright, so let's see what happens. Alright, waiting for it to post. Okay, well, we did get it to post, but we just had a crash here. Alright, so let's go back into BIOS and see if we can figure out what's going on. Something doesn't like something. So let's see if it's the memory controller. Try 1.35. See if it makes any difference. Okay, it posted much quicker that time. Okay, there we go, got into Windows. Okay, so for the 4400 stock rating that these memory modules are rated for, we needed 1.35 volts of system agent and VCCIO voltage. And that tells you that our overclock is probably going to be limited by the CPU more than anything else. Good part of that may have to do with the fact that the CPU is already overclocked, but CPU performance is a lot more important than RAM speed. In this build, we're going for practicality. If you're going for an all-out memory overclock just for the heck of it, or just to set a record, then you'd probably want to downclock the CPU before doing that. But that's not what we're going for in this PC. We're going for a real-world usage scenario. So now that we have that speed set, we're going to run memtest pro. Okay, so we've got 12 threads, so we're going to set 12 threads here in memtest pro, and we're going to let it automatically allocate as much memory as it can, and we're going to start the test. Alright, so you can see here each thread has a % coverage. Okay, so it just froze. So that's telling us it's not stable, but what I was going to say is we're going to be looking for 400% coverage at a minimum, and that'll probably take several hours. But that's what we're going to be looking for. Since that's not stable, we're going to go ahead and go back into BIOS and do some more tweaking. Okay, so one thing I just noticed is the TRC. We didn't set TRC, and the XMP setting for TRC is 69, and it looks like the motherboard is defaulting to maybe 50. So we're gonna set that to 69, and we'll see if that makes any difference there. So let's just take a look here. So yeah, 69. Alright. Okay, so that didn't work. We had the same crash pretty much right away. So we're going to go back into BIOS. Okay, so let's seems like we're limited by the CPU's memory controller. So let's go ahead and let's set the ring ratio down to 43. Now I wouldn't recommend doing this normally for everyday use, because it's probably not worth the performance gain you're going to get by being able to increase the memory overclock. But we're gonna use this now just to validate the fact that our memory overclock is limited by the CPU right now. That's our theory, so let's validate it. Alright, so we're frozen again, so that didn't help at all. Alright, next thing we'll try is we'll lower the CPU overclock, and we'll see if that helps. Okay, so I'm going to set our CPU multiplier at 44, and that should give us an idea if it's if the problem is related to the CPU. Now, if it still crashes at this point, then it's either the memory itself or it's just the motherboard can't handle that speed. Alright, let's fire up memtest again and see what happens. At least we won't have to wait long, it crashes quick. Same thing. Alright, so it's not the CPU causing the instability, it's either the RAM or the motherboard. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and set our ring ratio back to our known stable 47. I'm going to set the CPU back to its original overclock of 5 gigahertz. And what we're going to try is we'll try a little bit more voltage on the RAM. We shouldn't need it. This is stock settings for the RAM, but we're going to try it anyway and see what happens. What I'm not going to do is I'm not going to go any higher on the system agent or VCCIO because 1.35 is what I feel comfortable with, especially since this PC is going to someone else. I don't want to do anything that might degrade the memory controller. But if this doesn't work, then we know that the only way to get this RAM to run at this speed is going to be to increase these two voltages, or it's just the motherboard itself. So we'll see what we can do. If we can't get 4400, we'll step it down a little bit, and then we'll tighten up the timings as much as we can. Alright, let's fire it up again and take a look. And same exact crash. Okay, so it's not the RAM definitely, or it's not not a matter of RAM voltage. So I think the issue here is just the motherboard itself. 4400 mega transfers per second is a pretty high speed for DDR4. It's a little bit less than I would have thought. Since we're only running 2 DIMMs, I would have thought we'd be able to get a little bit better speed out of it. But I guess this is just the limit of this motherboard's design. So we'll try 4200 next and see how we can do with that. Or actually, I think the next step down is 4333, so we'll try that instead. For that, we're going to have to enable odd ratios. Okay, so we'll try 4300. Yeah, I just noticed we left the RAM speed at, or the RAM voltage at 1.5, so we'll bring that back down to 1.45. We don't need 1.5 for this. We're not going to be able to get an all-out maximum frequency out of this. So all right, let's try again. There's thread 1, thread 2, and thread 3. Okay, so we've already gotten a little further. Okay, so we know that that's an improvement. But just before we let this go, I'm going to go ahead and stop it, and I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to really loosen up the primary timings and try and see if that makes any difference in the overclock. Just want to cover all the bases here. We're going to try some very relaxed timings just to see what would happen. So let's go here and let's try 22, 22, 22, 50. So we'll disable the odd ratio. We'll try 4400 again. See what happens. Thread 1. Wow, okay. We've already frozen. So that time we had a crash even sooner. That's strange. Okay, so we had another crash after not too long, so we're going to go ahead and lower the memory speed to 4200 and try again. Okay, so we've got MemTest Pro running again, and as you can see, it hasn't crashed, but we've already got 8 errors, and 16 errors on thread number 7. So that's not stable. So we're gonna have to lower the speed again. So we'll try 41 now. Okay, so 4100 crashed right away. So we're down to 4000. So we're gonna try again here. See if we can get 4000 stable. Wow, okay. Well, no, it seems like it didn't like that at all. That's even worse. interesting results here. So something kind of strange is going on here. So we're gonna try. I'm gonna set the timings back to auto. And it's frozen. Okay, so that didn't do the trick either. So we're back up at 4200 megahertz again, and it's kind of strange because at 4200 we're actually more stable than we were at 4000. So that's kind of strange. Makes me wonder about the BIOS and the motherboard. So that's the next thing we're going to do. We're going to update the BIOS, and then we're going to try again. Okay, so we're in the BIOS here. We're going to go ahead and update it. Okay, so alright, well, Q flash, so that's F8. So yes, we're going to update the BIOS. That's our file. Yes, we're sure. Alright, here we go. Alright, so that's done. Okay, so at 4400, we don't have any better results. We've got some errors, and we've got a freeze here again. So we're going to lower it back down to 4000, see if it's any better than it was the first time. Okay, we've got a crash at the same point here. The next thing I'm going to do is we're going to go down to 3800. And if that doesn't work, we're going to try and swap in some new RAM. Alright, so we've been running MemTest Pro for a little while here at 3800. You can see it's still going, about 16%. We haven't had any errors yet. So far it's stable at 3800, which is quite a bit lower than the 4400 speed that the RAM is rated for. So we're going to let this run for a while here and see if it's actually stable. And then once that happens, we're going to try and get to the bottom of why we couldn't get a better overclock out of this. I want to find out if it's the CPU, if it's the RAM itself, or if it's the motherboard. So the first thing we'll do is we'll swap in another kit of RAM. I've got an identical kit of this RAM, so we'll swap that in and see if that makes any difference. The next thing we'll do after that is we'll drop another CPU in. We've got a 10900K sitting here waiting for another build, so we'll drop that in and see if it'll handle a better overclock than this for the memory. And if that doesn't help, then that's just what we're going to get, 3800. And that's okay, because nowhere does Intel guarantee anything higher than the DDR4 26 something speed that they technically rate their CPUs at. So anything higher than that, they're not liable for whether or not you can reach those speeds. And same thing with the motherboard. They don't guarantee what speed you're going to be able to hit. They just guarantee what speed they theoretically support. And on this board, it's 5000 plus, which is pretty good. But we'll see. So we'll see if we can come anywhere near that with a different CPU and different memory. Okay, so we've been running MemTest overnight here at 3800 megatransfers per second, and we're almost at 3000 coverage. We've got no errors, so this is definitely stable. Okay guys, so we've made a few changes here, and as you can see, we're running now at DDR4 4400 speed, 2200 megahertz. And we've got no errors so far. So this is the furthest we've been able to come with this RAM. Now this is the old RAM that we were testing before, and it's the same motherboard. The only difference is the CPU. So we made a couple of changes. The first thing we did was we reseated the RAM. After that, we were able to get MemTest Pro running for a little while at 4200 speeds. and then we shut it off, and we tried different sticks of RAM to see if we can get those to do any better, and they didn't do any better. So reseating the RAM did help a little bit there, but we were still having errors at 4400 speeds. So then the next thing we tried is we swapped in our 10900K, and as you can see with the 10900K, we're running here at 4400 speeds. Alright, so that tells us that the overclock was limited by the CPU. So our 10600K obviously has a weaker memory controller than the 10900K here that we have installed currently. But this video is based on the 10600K PC. So what we're going to do is we're going to stop the test now, and we're going to put the 10600K back in. And after we reseated the RAM and cleaned out the slots a little bit and, with compressed air, we're going to try again, see if we can get 4200 to be stable. Okay, so we've got CPU-Z running here, or not CPU-Z, we've got MemTest Pro running here again. With the 10600K swap back in, we're at 4200 megahertz now. Just before recording this, I tried 4400 just to validate our findings, and it crashed pretty early on. So, alright, so we're going to try again 4200 megahertz, and we'll see if we can hit that. That looks like it's going to be the limit for our CPU memory controller, or our CPU memory controller rather, will be the limit of this overclock today. Okay, so we've been running for a little while here at 4200, and we've got 8 errors so far on thread 0. So we're going to lower the frequency. We'll try 41. Okay, so as you can see at 41, we've got errors immediately here. So it seems as if 41 is less stable than 4200. So obviously this system doesn't like odd memory ratios, so we'll try 4000 next. Okay, here's 4000 megahertz, and we crashed right away. We didn't even start the test, and we're frozen here just as thread 0 was getting started. So again, it's pretty peculiar results like we were seeing before. I thought reseating the RAM had helped things out, but it looks like we're seeing the same pattern we did before. The 4400 and 4200 speeds seem to be a little bit more stable than 4200 and 4000. So we're maxing out here at 3800 once again, but since this is happening, we might as well try higher. Let's try 46 and see what happens. Okay, so we just tried 4600, and we couldn't get it to post at 4600, so 4600 and 4400 are not stable with this CPU. 4200 seemed like it was slightly more stable than 4100 and 4000, with 3800 being the max stable overclock that we're able to hit with this CPU installed. So kind of interesting results here. It just goes to show, to sum everything up, that a memory overclock is a lot more dependent on your components as a whole, your system as a whole, rather than the memory installed. You're limited by the motherboard, you're limited by the CPU's memory controller, and you're limited by the RAM itself. So in this case, we were clearly limited by the CPU's memory controller, just not liking anything higher than 3800, which is fine. It's within stock specifications, so there's nothing wrong with the CPU. It's just got a slightly weaker memory controller than some other CPUs, but perfectly adequate for what it's advertised as. It's not advertised as being able to run 3800. It's advertised as being able to run somewhere around 2600 or 2900, I think is what Intel specs their memory at. Okay, so I think this is a good point to end this video. We're going to make this a two-part series, since this has gone pretty long already. In part 2, we'll start tightening the timings down and seeing if we can get some more performance out of our RAM. And for now, we're gonna call this 3800 megahertz, or mega transfers per second, for our memory overclock for this build as far as bandwidth. And next video, we'll tighten down the timings. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.